102 and URFM 103.7 as we take a look at things happening in the world of politics. And today things sort of happening in the world of political commentary, kind of, with our Professor of Politics from the University of Newcastle, Jim Jose.
Morning,
Jim,
Mark.
Good morning, Jim. Things from across the other side of the world that are sort of making some writings here in Australia. Good morning.
Yes, good morning, Mark. It is a story that's been brewing and it's broken open a little bit, but you'd struggle to find it in the mainstream press, the bits and pieces. But basically the story is of Lachlan Murdoch of the News Corps suing a smaller news magazine, political commentary newspaper, if you like, online, Crikey. And one of its lead authors, Bernard Keane, wrote a story. He's written a number of stories on January the 6th, the storming of the Capitol in the US. And basically, it's emerged in big, pretty well every major newspaper and news outlet, except for Fox, in the US, have basically come down and identified Donald Trump as a key catalyst in all of this, if not the brains trust behind it, but certainly has come to be seen as the person who bears significant responsibility. In these stories, they've also talked about the role of Fox and the way in which Fox News acted as an amplification and political machine that spread the word about the alleged stolen election, the alleged political untruths that were being bandied about by the Trump organisation, and encouraging people to turn up to the Capitol on the day. So basically in the US, it's taken for granted, and everyone understands that Fox News was implicated in this all the way down the line. And in the US, they are quite aware that behind Fox News is Lachlan Murdoch and Rupert Murdoch. So within the US, there's absolutely no question about the way in which this is unfolded and the relationship between Fox News, the Murdochs, and the events that have happened. So in Crikey, they've been reporting on some of this, and in one of the articles by Bernard Keane, used an allusion to, or a direct reference to, how Richard Nixon was described in his role in Watergate as, quote, an unindicted co-conspirator. Bernard Keane used the same expression in his article, in which he says Donald Trump is the core conspirator here, something like words to that effect, and the Murdochs are unindicted co-conspirators.
According to his writings,
yes. So what's happened as a result of that is that there was, shall we say, exchange of letters between the legal eagles of both organisations, Lachlan Murdoch threatening to sue for defamation in Australia. And Crikey eventually said, well, come on, sue us. We stand by what we've written. Everyone else in America takes us for granted. They understand that the Murdochs and Fox News were powerful players in this whole process.
Well, I think you have to look at with big media organisations, those that have a lot of influence, they're quite a lot of times is always going to have a, if not a political standpoint, certainly an opinion or a thread that, or even a culture that runs through organisations. So that may or may not be a surprise to someone, that side of things. But of course, if you look at all, if we're still sticking with the US for a minute here, if you look at all of the networks, there is certainly no organisation there that's right wing friendly either. Most of which would lean absolutely.
Well, you'd have to say Fox News is very right wing friendly. There's absolutely no doubt about it. Their political position is quite clear. But the issues that I think are really interesting is, one, Lachlan Murdoch would never be able to launch a lawsuit against Crikey in the US under US law, under the First Amendment protection. Secondly, this is a major news story, or has been a news story in the international press. So, for example, Al Jazeera, BBC, CNN, Los Angeles Times, New York Times, Chicago Tribune, they've all run variations on a theme about this story, about this major news corporation or this head of a news corporation taking on some minnow of a organisation in backwater Australia.
Well, maybe. But if someone's going to have a crack at your credibility, wouldn't want that either. And again, whether someone's a smaller organisation or a bigger one or not.
The issue is that in Australia, Lachlan Murdoch can sue for defamation because we have no direct First Amendment protections that US journalism would have, for example. And secondly, in the US, as I said, that it would be protected by the First Amendment, and no one bats an eyelid at any of these stories. They understand that Fox News took a partisan position. They understand that the Murdochs are behind Fox News and encouraged and were part of the Fox News process, and what defamation was involved in that. It was a straight-out political issue. In Australia, however, Lachlan Murdoch has the opportunity, and one I think should be asking the question, what is to be gained by suing a small organisation, a small newspaper organisation in Australia? Has Lachlan Murdoch been defamed? He wasn't named in the articles concerned, simply the Murdochs generically, which one might impute that Lachlan Murdoch is one of the Murdochs and hence one of the people.
Well, there'd be no dispute in that being, there'd be no dispute in saying, well, if you're talking about in that context, he would be one of the two or three people that would absolutely.
There's an irony here, Mark. There's an irony. The Murdoch press in Australia have been one of the so-called champions of free speech. Certainly when certain voices are, shall we say, muted or forced to be a bit more silent, the Murdoch press has come out very strongly defending free speech and decrying those who would restrict free speech. Here we now have the head of one of those organisations suing a small organisation in Australia on the grounds that they've been defamed, and if they win, they shut that organisation down and they effectively eliminate the free speech option that organisation would have had. So there's this certain amount of irony that there's a really powerful media organisation, or the head of this media organisation, and this time we're speaking of Fox News, wants to stomp on a small newspaper in Australia to prove what? Exactly what?
Well, if you're reporting, but there is a bit of a fine line here too, Jim, isn't there? Because if you're reporting something as hard concrete fact, as in here's the evidence to suggest that A went with B to cause C, fine. But if you're becoming more of an opinion writer, which is getting down that defamation road, that's probably a road that none of us really should be treading, or should be. Of course, we should be treading fairly lightly, partly because of the laws that are in place.
Yeah, there is a series of causal steps here, a series of dots, and the Crikey authors have joined those dots in a particular way, and they've joined them in the same way that dozens of other organisations and journalists and writers and commentators in the United States have joined them. So there was nothing untoward or irregular or prejudiced, if you like, about it. The evidence has been laid out before the committee examining the January the 6th insurrection. There's absolutely no doubt that the people who invaded the Capitol were encouraged to do so across the board. There's absolutely no doubt that Fox News was amplifying this in a big way and encouraging them, and a number of key Fox journalists actually were reporting the events as they unfolded as this is just a benign, this is not barely happening. Yeah. Meanwhile, people are being injured and as we saw, some people, both protesters and officials, were killed, and they were threatening to do serious damage to members of the US Congress. Literally, they wanted to hang the Vice President.
Well, I think we need to be careful in terms of what we're also alleging that companies are that are pushing for. A bit of a difference between encouraging people to turn up and be a part of a protest versus entering a building and becoming part of vandalism and all the other events that we saw. The one thing we'll say, Jim, as time has gotten away from us, but the one group that will be the absolute winners out of all of this, regardless of where you sit on these matters, are those in the legal fraternity who will probably be putting out some nice bills.
Well, the defamation cases always bring out the shall we say, the dollar bills happening, and the lawyers and the people involved in those cases always benefit from it, and the litigants on both sides rarely benefit that much. But this is a really important case because it's something politically that we are facing, if you like, the power of a major corporation, media moguls, and where their reach begins and ends, and what level of exercise of that power should be acceptable in a democratic society. Perhaps it means that we in Australia need to modify our constitution a bit and have some guaranteed First Amendment type provision in our constitution, so that it's understood that there are certain parameters, but pretty big parameters, around the exercise of free speech, which would mean that the sort of litigation it's unfolding wouldn't get off the ground.
All right, well, that is a whole other space, which we'll, I'm sure, explore in future meetings. Jim, as always, a pleasure. We'll talk to you in a fortnight.
Yep.
All right,
Cheers.
there he is, our Professor of Politics from the University of Newcastle, Dr. Jim Jose, at 2NURFM 103.7.
A broadcast service of the University of Newcastle.